staring in your eyes, maybe I'd have seen how lonely I would be. Now look at me. I should have been loving your tears away, instead of standing there with nothing to say at all. Yeah, girl, the second I saw tail lights, I should have ran after you. I should have known everything I had to lose. Yeah, before you walked away, you let me have my space, before I ran you right into the arms of someone new. I should have ran after you. Yeah, one second thought could have stopped it all. Letting you go was just the calm before the storm I'd thrown myself into. I should have ran after you. Girl, I should have thought it through. Yeah, I should have ran after you. You're the hardest thing I ever had to lose. Yeah, before you walked away, you let me have my space, before I ran you right into the arms of someone new. I should have ran after you. Yeah, I should have ran after you. Yeah, I should have. Now I got eyes spilling down in another strong drink. Taking my time, sipping through the pain. Girl, you got those blue jeans on, your pretty hair pulled back. Just to share this night with you, I guess I'm lucky like that. I open up the passenger door, watch you slide on in. You ask me where we're going tonight with that sexy grin. I can take you all the way to Colorado. We can dance, I can two-step or tango. Doesn't matter long as I get some time when we quit. You let me taste that cherry lipstick. I like the way your fingers feel tangled up in mine. Girl, I ain't letting go of your hand all night. We can crash and go to bed early, or stay and watch the sunrise. We can rush, we don't have to hurry, long as I'm by your side. I can take you all the way to Colorado. We can dance, I can two-step and tango. Doesn't matter long as I get some time when we quit. And you let me taste that cherry lipstick. It's not enough just to touch, girl, you know I love It's the roses just because you just. This life is full of choices, hard to make one. All the voices in my head, those blue eyes I'm in love with, or that highway, whichever I pick, there'll be regrets. I go one way, I lose everything. I go the other way, same thing. I'm torn and it's tearing me apart. I wanna go, but I don't wanna break her heart. Like a sword with a double-edged blade, it's gonna cut deep either way. This little town, that big world, chase the dream, won't keep the girl. More than once I packed it all up, but I'd break down, blame it on the truck, just couldn't go. Just wanna be out there making my mark, laid out every night in her arms. I'm torn and it's tearing me apart. I wanna go, but I don't wanna break her heart. Like a sword with a double-edged blade, it's gonna cut deep either way. This little town, that big world, chase the dream, won't keep the girl. I don't know why I can't have it all.
What's going on, guys? Thanks for being here. Week 7 already. Can't believe we're already here. Almost halfway, I guess, through the 20-week season. If you're playing playoffs with us, if you played some preseason, you've been here a while. But I hope everyone got their coffee. I got mine. Like kind of doing these in the morning. It's been a lot of fun. Have some new stuff to show you guys. Maybe you'll hate it, maybe you won't. But gonna go through at least a portion of one of the sheets that I'm using on Sunday mornings. If you're new here, be sure and check out Fantasy Labs and the Action Network. We have a really great prop bets tool as well that allocates our projections from Sean Corner and all the various books. So if you're big on sports betting, we have pretty much something for everyone, which is great. Looks like the chat's working out well. I got the tweet out. We're on top of it this morning. Yeah, it's going to be a unique slate. One of those ones that if you started the week early, you probably had to throw away a lot of your teams just because of some of the value that opened up. So we'll definitely talk about that. We'll talk about kind of the games I'm on in general. I want to spend a little bit more time this morning on game situation, on pace, on some offensive line versus defensive line stuff, because I honestly think that that's a great place to start. And since a lot of you guys are starting your morning with me, I thought that it would be a really good thing to go through some of the games from that perspective. So excited to do that. Thanks for everyone that's here in the chat. Pete, thanks for being here, man. Appreciate it. God, I swear to God, Peter Jennings tweets something and instantly, like, Twitter starts blowing up. It's just insane. So I hope you guys caught his Periscope last night. He does Periscopes on Saturday nights. Be sure to check those out if you aren't already. Also, we have Manny and Hodge right after me. Full morning is streaming. And then Smiz, as you guys, I'm sure most of you guys watch him before lock, but we have a full morning of streaming for you guys. I think it's a lot of fun to kind of get in here and interact with you guys. Just kind of housekeeping stuff. We do have, as you can see, the Fantasy Labs NFL Twitter account over here. We'll have the feed going throughout the stream, but if you aren't already, be sure and get those push notifications to your phone. And while we're talking about the phone, be sure and download the Action Network app. So something I'm using to monitor all my bets on Sundays. I used to be one of those people that had like a ton of different apps on my phone, but now I just need one. So if you haven't checked that out, be sure and do that. Looks like we have a decent amount of people on the stream. Shout out to the chat. Jason, thanks for being here. Mashed potatoes, bros. Nice. Kevin, thanks for being here, man. Samuel, appreciate it. Yeah, throw a bunch of questions in the chat. I'm going to go over kind of the slate as a whole, and then we'll definitely answer some questions. David Eckler, a main slate start. Yeah, so that game for the Chargers actually isn't on the main slate, or else Eckler would have been pretty interesting. Arnie, a Fantasy Lab sub. Love it. Yeah, definitely love to see the Fantasy Lab subs in here. Jason, yeah, we'll get to Cohen for sure. Definitely like him quite a bit. The Lyrical Oracle, thanks for being here, man. Appreciate it. Doozy, good luck. Yeah, good luck to you too, man. We're going to get through this together. Trust me. Null fan, what's up, man? Samuel. All right. Everyone, yeah, just throw your questions in the chat as we go. I'll try and keep an eye on that. As you guys know, I'm like the worst on Twitch ever, but kind of slowly getting a feel for it. Looks like we have some people over on YouTube as well. See how many viewers we got. So we got about 35 people on YouTube, which is awesome. We got about 31 on Twitch, so great. Yeah, I'm going to have the Twitch chat open, so if you aren't checking us out on Twitch, consider doing that as well. Give me a follow over on Twitch, sub on YouTube. All my videos throughout the week are usually posted on YouTube, but the interaction on Twitch is just great if you haven't checked that out. So anyways, enough news and notes. This slate, guys, it's going to be an interesting one. So if we just look at some of the implied team totals, I'm sure most of you guys are aware at this point that the Rams are at the top. I think it's going to be a great situation for the passing game there. Obviously, Todd Gurley is one of the only guys that we have to pay all the way up for. This slate shapes up as one where we don't have a lot of the main games, right? And we're noticing that since Sunday Night Football is no longer on the main slate, we no longer have Monday Night Football. So a lot of these primetime games kind of limits us in some ways. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that. But before we get into any of the Vegas stuff or anything on the main page, I wanted to kind of get your feel for this other page that I've been working on. So this is basically a smaller scale example of some of the things that I'm looking at on Sunday mornings. So when you're looking at a game, how do you choose a game? Not necessarily for game stacks, not necessarily even just for quarterback. I think that looking at pace is extremely important. So one of the things that I have here is a metric that we have at Fantasy Labs called projected plays. Plays are a little bit different than pace, right? So offensive plays, it definitely depends on how many pass attempts there are going to be. So we take that into account. We take into account the defense on both sides of the ball, what we think game script is going to be like. So projected plays, something that I'm definitely keeping an eye on. And then I've also used Football Outsiders pace. I've kind of allocated different of the home and away splits, neutral pace into one ranking. So if we get sort by pace, the highest paced game on the slate is this New Orleans at Baltimore game. And as you can see over here, looking at funnel defenses as well. So a higher number is a pass funnel for this specific page. I have the colors set up as the green ones are popping, the red ones are not, and kind of everything in the middle is a little bit jumbled because typically from a matchup perspective, hashtag defense matters. Yeah, I'm more or less looking at the tails for this kind of stuff. So pass funnel rating for Baltimore is something that I'm definitely keeping an eye on. New Orleans, much better against the run than against the pass. So definitely think it's a really good spot for Flacco from that perspective. So from team plays, they are, I don't know why this is red, this should be green. Third highest team plays, third highest game plays rank, and then they do rank highest in neutral pace. But another thing that's really interesting is this score for the offensive line. So I'm basically averaging the offensive line versus defensive line battle. I'm using PFF and Football Outsiders, two kind of different metrics for pressure. The first one is more of a subjective pressure, right? So Pro Football Focus, they put a heavy weight on pressures, not necessarily sacks. So it's a little bit subjective, but Football Outsiders definitely more objective, weighing sacks heavily. So I kind of averaged the two and kind of came up with some scores here. So as far as the offensive line, looks like it's a really good spot for Baltimore against New Orleans. New Orleans doesn't pressure very well. Baltimore's offensive line has been extremely strong this year. Another really good matchup at the line of scrimmage is Jared Goff. So what I've done here is basically allocate pressure versus yards per attempt for when they're under pressure and when they're clean. So again, looking for outliers. So Mitch Trubisky has been much more poor when he's been pressured this year than when he's not. The good news is for him, pretty good matchup against this New England team that it's not that they don't pressure a ton, but Chicago's offensive line has been really strong this year. So if we look down, Kirk Cousins, one of the best quarterbacks in the league under pressure. He's going to see it again this week because Minnesota just doesn't have a very good offensive line, of course. And believe it or not, Deshaun Watson as well. He's going to be tested for sure against this Jacksonville front, who pressures extremely well. Houston's offensive line, obviously very poor. So worst matchup at the line of scrimmage, Deshaun Watson. So that's kind of how this is working. And then some stuff over here that I'm just looking at from a more broad perspective from Vegas. So looking at home favorite quarterbacks, something I like to do in cash games. Believe it or not, I have some stuff here from, if you haven't checked out any of Jonathan Bales's books, definitely would recommend it. So there's a lot of really great macro trends. A lot of the stuff you can do in the trends tool over at Fantasy Labs, but home favorite quarterbacks, ton of value, really high consistency for those guys. But home underdogs, even just underdogs in general, tend to go a little bit under own in GPPs. And if we're worried more about game flow, you can get a really good ownership discount there. So another thing I'm looking at is team totals, of course. Believe it or not, value tends to plummet for some of these totals that are above 26 and 28, and probably because these are priced in by DraftKings, right? So I'm kind of looking in the mid-range if I'm looking purely for value, but it does plummet when you get below 22. So any of these red ones doesn't necessarily mean that I'm just automatically fading a player, but it's definitely something I'm considering as a data point. Looking at the spread, so really want tight spread, not just at quarterback, but when you're looking at some of your game stacks. A lot of times for a game to completely shoot out, it needs to go back and forth a little bit. So yeah, if you guys hate this sheet, totally cool. Don't have to do any more of this. If you guys like it, maybe I'll kind of go through some other positions on a different day. But thought I would kind of ease you guys into it here. All right, hang on. I'm getting a little bit behind on the chat here. This is great that everyone's here. Scroll back here. Which game total under 50 likely to be higher scoring than expected? All right, let's go back to the Vegas page quickly. So under 50, yeah. For me, it's this Baltimore and New Orleans game. I really like the pace. I like the game for Joe Flacco in particular. I talked about it is kind of a pass situation, or pass funnel situation for Flacco. Really like the game for pace. Really like the game for plays. And then there's a lot of really cheap options for Baltimore, right? So I'm pretty interested in Willie Snead as a punt option. He's a guy that's been seeing a decent amount of volume at a cheap price point. One of the things that I'm doing when I'm looking for value in our models over at Labs is sorted by projected plus minus. So Willie Snead, one of our top values today at 4K. I think he's a really good value if you want to pair him with Joe Flacco. Definitely think that makes sense. Another direction you can go with Flacco is John Brown. Obviously, that's kind of how this New Orleans defense has been getting beat. They've been getting beat deep, so that definitely sets up well for John Brown in this passing offense for Baltimore. I do want to talk quickly about Alvin Kamara. So I definitely think that Kamara is going to be the lowest owned out of Zeke and Todd Gurley. I think people are, in general, kind of a little bit scared off of the Ingram touches, and just the matchup isn't fantastic. But if we get kind of single-digit ownership on Alvin Kamara, He's a guy that we were still considering last year when Ingram was on the team, at least for upside in tournaments. Really like this game in general, so I think he'll be a unique way to go to get volume, but it does set up pretty well for this game to score points. So I'm kind of interested in that, at least in tournaments. I don't know if I'll make it there on my main team. If you guys haven't been around for any of my other videos or streams, I primarily play some of these smaller field tournaments at kind of the high to mid stakes. So I'm more dialed into a pretty specific core by this time of the day, but definitely still considering plays like Kamara for upside in tourneys. So the problem with that, at least on paper, is that only 3 teams have allowed fewer receptions to running backs than the Ravens. And so it's not a great matchup, but if one guy is going to kind of break through that, definitely think it can be Kamara. So yeah, to answer your question, really like this Saints-Baltimore game from kind of a pace perspective, and also really it's a really nice spot at the line of scrimmage. So I'm interested in Flacco for sure as one of the top guys to pay down for at the position. Think Beathard makes sense as well, Blake Bortles, but I'm just warming to Joe Flacco little by little, kind of maybe debating pairing him with Snead, or if I do end up with the salary, I definitely think that John Brown is a play that's going a little bit overlooked in the community right now. All right. Yeah, happy Sunday, Charles. Thanks for being here, man. Thoughts on Beathard at his price, value needed at quarterback this week? Yeah, I mean, I paid on a quarterback quite a bit. So let's go back over to that other sheet and take a look at what Beathard's matchup is like. Obviously, you do get the savings from Beathard. Do really like him quite a bit. So it doesn't really stand out from kind of a pass funnel situation. As far as plays, they do have, it's the second highest paced game, the Rams and San Francisco game. It's one of the highest totals, or it is the highest total for a reason. There should be a lot of offensive plays. Decent matchup at the line of scrimmage. For the Rams side of things, it is a little bit more concerning for San Francisco. But at least in a small sample this year, Beathard has been pretty good under pressure, 3.0 yards per attempt. I'm just going to get rid of that. Anyways, I don't know why my light messes up like that, but we're going to get rid of that. So yeah, so 3.0 yards per attempt under pressure, definitely something that I think matters. So yeah, I don't normally play quarterbacks that are nearly double-digit underdogs, but the Beathard play definitely makes a certain amount of sense, especially if you want to pay all the way down. And the guy I'm probably pairing him with is Marquise Goodwin. So yeah, I'm not necessarily too concerned. 4,600 seems like a really good price for him. I mean, anytime you're playing that X role in this Kyle Shanahan offense, I'm certainly interested in that. I mean, he's being featured in this offense. It's going to be a really strong game for points. I think it sets up really well. I don't think it's necessarily a negative matchup for how he's used, and it's just not, his volume is just not being priced in. I feel like I think he's a really solid value at 4,600. Now that we're on that game, let's talk a little bit more about some of the players. Definitely like Jared Goff. I mentioned that at the line of scrimmage, it sets up really well for him. His team is pass protected extremely well. They are a run heavy team. One thing I didn't mention about this sheet is offensive pass percent. So if you can see Andrew Luck here, they have the highest pass percentage on offense in the entire league. Definitely something that I'm looking at. I'm not too concerned with only volume at quarterback, but I definitely think that it's valuable to kind of look at these pass situations. Compare Jared Goff with Todd Gurley, but Goff is the most expensive quarterback as well. So another route you can go is Robert Woods. Really like Robert Woods, especially because Cooper Kupp is going to be out. I think that has a really large effect on this offense as a whole, specifically for Woods. If he gets some more run in the slot, Kupp's a guy that had a massive role in the red zone. So really like the idea of going to Woods at the high end of the wide receivers, Woods and Thielen for me, but the price difference for Woods definitely opens up a little bit more on your roster, allows me to get to some of these running backs that I like. Like to hear your thoughts on Hopkins later in the stream. Yeah, so Hopkins, it's a bet on talent play, right? He's extremely cheap. They price him way down. I don't know if I'll make it there myself, but if you're running out a lot of multi-entry, definitely think that he's in play. One guy can kind of beat this matchup against Jacksonville, I mean, Hopkins has done it before. So I don't think he's going to be a core play for me, but at 6,900, the kind of volume that he's getting is just insane for that price point. So I don't know. I honestly don't think that this matchup lowers his floor a ton because his floor is mostly based on his volume anyway. But I do think it lowers his ceiling, which is something that you have to think about for tournaments. I could see it being kind of an inefficient game for Hopkins. But again, looking at this sheet over here, Deshaun Watson has been really good under pressure this year, but he's been really under pressure a lot. So something to think about. I think that looking at pressure, looking at offensive line versus defensive line is really important, almost more important than looking at specific like DVOA type matchups. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Eckler, the man today. Yeah, if you guys are playing that one game slate, definitely think Eckler. That was kind of something that came out this morning with Melvin Gordon. So yeah, keep an eye on that. Which game? You touched on that one already. Started like this slate when it appeared a third of the teams were going to play Chubb. Yeah, so let's talk about the Chubb play. So the problem with Chubb, at least for me initially, is I have a little bit of bias from preseason when he was just not very good. But he's played really well so far this year in kind of a limited role. Now that there's no what's the face? Carlos Hyde. Gosh, I don't know why I was blanking on that name. I know there's no Carlos Hyde. He's going to be seeing the majority of the touches. My concern is that he hasn't been used very much in the passing game. It's always something that I feel like is not necessarily just for floor on DraftKings, but ceiling. So like, I mean, I've heard people talk about it before, but I think it's kind of still going understated. Like the way that the NFL is trending, like you still need ceiling. From a price point perspective, 3,800 opens up the entire slate with Chubb. So one thing that, I mean, I do like this offense quite a bit. I think he's a really solid FanDuel play because he's probably one of the higher equity touchdown plays, point per dollar that you could have. One thing that I do pay attention to, it's in our models over at Labs, but looking to see the percentage of times that a quarterback throws to his running backs. And Baker hasn't really used his running backs in the passing game much at all. Similarly to Deshaun Watson, even Carlos Wentz to a certain degree. These guys haven't been throwing to their running backs in comparison to Drew Brees, Tom Brady, even Joe Flacco, Cam Newton. Those guys throw to their running backs a ton. Baker doesn't necessarily do that. But again, at 3,800, it's all about what he opens up, right? Like if you really want to move down from a guy like Kerryon Johnson, who is used in the pass game, I think that you have to kind of think through what that extra salary gets you to. So at 3,600, I mean, you get a $900 difference off of Kerryon Johnson. What play are you making to make that switch? So, I mean, they are on the road. They're slight underdogs. Like slight underdogs normally shape up pretty well, at least from kind of a trend perspective for pass catching running backs. So like from a broad perspective, the Chubb play is not one that I normally make. I think I prefer Kerryon Johnson. I'm just not quite sure at this point of the morning which direction I'm going to go for salary. So Theo Riddick out. I think, I mean, the one issue, so it's both things. So he's going to get usage in the passing game more than Chubb, but there's still LeGarrette Blount at the goal line, so there's lack of touchdown upside for Kerryon Johnson. So that's something you got to consider. You can poke holes in both those guys. At the lower end of the salary range or somewhat lower end for running back, I saw someone in the chat earlier mention Tariq Cohen against the Patriots. And yeah, this is the play that I really want to try and get to. It's a really difficult spot. Obviously, normally against for the Patriots, because they have these kind of bigger linebackers that can't really keep up with these quick little gadgety type players. This is not normally a play I make, but I think that it's kind of a unique situation for guys like Cohen, Gabriel, really like kind of the outside kind of plays for Chicago, just because it sets up really well against this defense. I just don't think that there's any other way for this Bears team to realistically attack the Patriots if they're going to be smart outside of Cohen and Taylor Gabriel. I just think that is going to be the direction they go. Like, Cohen has led the Bears in targets over the last 2 weeks. And yeah, I mean, he's run a route on 39% of Mitch Trubisky's dropbacks over that same time span. So he's basically, if you think of him as a wide receiver at 5,100, we'd be extremely interested in the guy. Anything he kind of adds on the ground is kind of gravy. But the thing about paying down for these running backs we're talking about is those slots are so valuable. The running back slots, the flex spot, that's where you want to try and jam in as much volume as you can. At least that's what I try and do. So you're giving up a little bit of kind of, not necessarily floor with some of these guys, but I think that you have to make a consideration from a roster construction standpoint, what you get around it. It is a slate where we don't have a ton at running back to pay up for outside of Zeke and Gurley. So getting there on like that third slot, that flex slot, definitely think that makes sense. LASF may turn into a shootout like that LA Rams Minnesota Thursday night football game. Yeah, definitely agree with that. Love the Rams side of the ball. Still working through the Beathard play to see if he's totally I don't know if he's necessarily necessary, but the Rams side of the ball, Woods, Gurley, Goff, that's going to be a core stack that I think is going to be really successful in GPPs today. Thoughts on Chubb versus Duke? Yeah, so Duke's the one that's going to be used more in the passing game, right? But Duke's more of a guy that like deserves more probably, but just hasn't been getting it. And I mentioned that Mayfield doesn't really throw to his running backs a ton. I think Duke Johnson's a really scary play. I'm not really sure if I'll go there myself. I prefer the guy that's going to get more touches, and I think that's going to be Chubb. Colts chalk D, not a lot to like on defense this week. Yeah, defense is kind of gross. So this page, we don't even have to just use it for quarterback. Let's look at it from the other perspective. So the worst offensive line matchups on the slate. Let's sort by that quickly. And so Deshaun Watson, mentioned him. He's going to see a lot of pressure. In general, I think that it's a matchup where I don't know how easy it is to get to Jacksonville is the problem. But if you can get there, definitely think that they have the highest point expectation on the entire slate at the defense position. But looking at Indy, I think it's interesting against Buffalo. I just have this imprint in my head of Derek Anderson just throwing all these pick sixes. What I like the most about the Colts play is they're 3,300, yeah, but they are the second largest favorite on the slate. That's something that I'm definitely paying attention to. So let's just go ahead and sort by spread here and look at some of the bigger favorites. So yeah, we talked about the Rams defense. So even just looking at the Indy defense, it's a really good matchup there for Indy against Buffalo. I think Philly is really interesting at 2,600. Another team that pressures a good amount. Cam Newton does take sacks a decent amount. So yeah, I'm kind of looking at that at defense. I do think that the Colts are a really strong option. Colts, Jacksonville, Philly, those are kind of the ones I'm dialed into at the moment. Baltimore at 2,400. Like, I understand the play because there's going to be a lot of passing. Baltimore, I guess, think is going to struggle a little bit more than most people realize against New Orleans' offensive line to get pressure on Breeze. And again, Breeze is one of those guys that's been really good under pressure. But at 2,400, I think they're in play. Buffalo on the other side of this game, they're an underdog, but I do kind of like the Buffalo play for a couple reasons. So there's going to be a lot of passing. I mentioned that Indy has the highest pass percentage in the league. So the more pass opportunities you have, the more chances you have at turnovers. Andrew Luck hasn't been actually turning the ball over a ton, but he does take sacks. So I think that's something that's pretty interesting. Awesome sheet. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, no problem. I thought it'd be interesting. At least, I mean, it's early in the morning. A lot of the stuff to work through. You guys have probably listened to a good amount of shows. You'll hear a lot of great stuff from Manny and Hodge in a bit. I thought it would be interesting to look at some of the pressure stuff and offensive line stuff just to kind of get a feel for some of these games. Yeah, prefer the macro stuff to coin flip questions. Yeah, I mean, I'm totally fine answering some of these questions. Definitely keep throwing them in the chat, but I want to kind of help you guys make some of your own decisions too, right? So one of the things that I'm looking at this time of morning is which games do I want to be overweight on, and which games do I want to be short on. And I think a good way to start that is by looking at the high-paced games. Even before you get to the Vegas page, looking at the high-paced games, looking at the games at the line of scrimmage that skew one way or the other. In before ask coin flip questions. Yeah. Won't complain about anything that helps us narrow this stuff down. Yeah, thanks, Positive Paul. Thanks for being here, man. Appreciate it. Ever consider Snead over Chubb and DK Cash? Yeah, I like Snead quite a bit. I mentioned that I do really like Flacco. He's probably the guy I'll end up pairing with him just because you do get a decent price discount on Snead versus John Brown. And I'm always trying to pair a guy, and at 4K, a guy that's been seeing a decent target share. I'm not sure if he's my favorite cheap wide receiver, but he's definitely in my top 4. So we can talk a little bit about that quickly. So looking at some of the cheaper wide receiver options, the guys that I'm kind of dialed in on right now at wide receiver, so I mentioned Snead, but from the other kind of cheaper options, I do like Jermaine Kearse at 4,100, only 100 more against this Minnesota defense. Anytime you're avoiding Rhodes, that's something I want to do. Jermaine Kearse, some injuries for the Jets. Obviously, they released Terrell Pryor. Kearse kind of shreds in the area of the field that Minnesota has been really struggling. So like him a lot. I think he's going to be probably the chalkiest option of these guys. I mentioned Taylor Gabriel at 4,700. Really like the idea of Trubisky, Gabriel, and Cohen stacks in tournaments. I think that even playing Gabriel or Tariq Cohen as kind of a one-off play makes a ton of sense as well. So those are kind of the guys I'm kind of locked into right now at the cheaper ends. Definitely think there's some other good plays, but like I mentioned, I'm pretty dialed into a pretty small core at this point. You can make an argument for Kiki Kuti or Kute. God, I'd probably always say that guy's name wrong. Apologies. But yeah, I like Snead quite a bit, to answer your question, Riley. Kerryon Johnson, cash viable. Think Riddick gets work also. Yeah, so the Riddick thing, be sure and keep an eye on the Fantasy Labs NHL Twitter account. We're not expecting to see Riddick. So yeah, I think Kerryon Johnson, very viable in cash. He's a guy that can catch passes. And at 4,500 opens up a ton. Again, it's Chubb probably has a higher touchdown expectation. Kerryon Johnson's going to be using the passing game a little bit more, and it gives you a decent discount with Chubb. So those are the kind of things you're going to have to weigh when you're building teams. Mike Evans or Chris Godwin. So yeah, the price point is obviously a decent amount difference there. Definitely think that Tampa Bay, if I haven't mentioned that yet, the other side of this Cleveland game is super interesting. Played Godwin last week. It's just really hard to get comfortable with a guy that's just not going to be on the field a ton. The good news is he's being targeted on a ton of the routes that he is running. So Godwin at 4,600. Think I still prefer the other guys we mentioned, but do think he's in play. 9 targets last week, 6 receptions, but 2 of those targets were in the red zone, right? So I mean, he's seeing the right kind of usage. I'm probably not going to play Mike Evans at 7,700. Prefer guys like Thielen and Woods considerably more. Who's your core for GPP, if you don't mind? Yeah, so I'm not one of those guys that rolls out mass multi-entry. So if you've been kind of working through the stream here, you'll kind of get an idea of the players that I'm super high on for my main team. And if I was running GPPs, I'd probably be running game stacks with kind of some of these plays that I like on the outside of those game stacks. I think that's a really good way to go. If you weren't here for the stream on Tuesday when I was going over my lineup in the 1K last week, looking at the stack builder over at Fantasy Labs, you're honestly a lot more contrarian than you even realize when you're game stacking. So one of the things you can do with that tool is add in your stacks and see how the ownership was for the entire stack as a whole in the tournament. So just like throwing it in the Millie Maker, you'll realize even like last week, throwing in kind of some of the Atlanta stacks. So if you put in Matt Ryan, if you put in Julio, and say you brought it back with Godwin, you can actually see what the ownership was for that specific stack. And the more players you add to it, the more unique you are. I think sometimes we don't realize in our bubble how popular we think stacks are, but necessarily relative to the rest of the field, game stacking is still pretty unique. So I think you can game stack and put your kind of best plays around them. That's normally my strategy. Lineup construction with all the value opened up, would a balanced lineup be more contrarian in GPPs? Yeah, so I've considered that, and one of the guys from kind of a balanced perspective that I'm looking at is Golden Tate at 6,400. I think that it's conceivable, right, that kind of all these injuries, Riddick in general, some of this usage might go to Golden Tate at 6,400. I'm kind of interested in that. I don't love this game in general, but I think that, yeah, I mean, the pace is one of the worst stuff. We just go back to this pace sheet, looking at the game paces. Yeah, it's one of the worst pace games on the slate. There's going to be a decent amount of plays from the Detroit side of things, so I don't hate it. It's a good matchup at the line of scrimmage. But yeah, I think Golden Tate, if you're doing kind of an approach with kind of a mid-range approach to the way, I think that makes sense. Can you fade both Gurley and Thielen in GPP, or does it make sense to pay and have at least one of those guys in there? So Gurley and Thielen, two of the most highest expectation plays on the slate. And I don't know if you really need to look at it, can you fade them? Look at it is, if you do fade them, what kind of leverage should you be getting, right? So one of the ways that I like to do that is, at Fantasy Labs, we have a metric called leverage score. So it takes into consideration ownership and ceiling. So basically what I'm doing to try and figure out some of the best leverage plays is you can put those teams in your pool and then see where the leverage is going to be based on ownership and ceiling. So the ones that you're mentioning, so Adam Thielen, I think you can get a ton of leverage by playing Stephon Diggs at 7,200. He's priced to a point where I'm not really comfortable going there on my main team, but like the idea of the condensed target share there. So if I'm maybe playing a Gurley and not playing a Thielen team with it, maybe you roll it back with Diggs. You get kind of a contrarian stack with Cousins to Diggs. I think that makes some sense. As far as leveraging off Todd Gurley, it's a little bit more difficult. I think you can make an argument for Brandon Cooks at 7,100. You're leveraging off of Gurley and of Robert Woods. Prefer Gurley and Woods for sure. But in tournaments, you can either add Cooks to that, get a little bit more differentiation, or maybe on a non-Gurley team, if Cooks gets loose for a couple of touchdowns, doesn't necessarily sink Gurley or sink Woods, but if they have just an okay game, it could help you leverage the field there. Josh Reynolds for LA, that seems like the thin play of these cheap running or wide receivers to me. I think there's a solid chance that they line him up on Sherman's side. Sherman's a little banged up as well, but so Reynolds seems like the play that might work out at 3,500, but I think there's a little bit more risk carried to it than some of these other guys we've talked about. If you can't fit Gurley, Zeke, and Kamara and DK GPP, would it worth paying down receivers? Yeah, so it's really tough to make a Gurley, Zeke, and Kamara team, but you'll be pretty unique if you can make it work. There's definitely some value. The problem is the value is at running back, and then there are a few cheaper guys at wide receiver. I actually had that same idea, like what would happen if you fit in Gurley, Zeke, and Kamara. You basically have to pay all the way down for Beathard at quarterback, which is something you can do, but it limits you for sure. So at tight ends, I haven't spent a lot of time on tight end because I'm basically just locking in Njoku in this matchup against Tampa Bay, who just has been terrible against tight ends. Njoku is still at a price point where I think he's worth it. So yeah, I haven't really spent a ton of thoughts elsewhere, but if you're trying to jam in all three of those running backs, you might even have to save a little bit more at tight end than Njoku allows. Does the Gronk news move Edelman ahead of Thielen for you in DK Cash? No, he doesn't, but I do think that Edelman's a really strong play. Anytime the target share is any more condensed in New England, I'm interested in it. But as I mentioned, I'm not really excited about the pace in this game. I think it's one of the slowest paced games on the entire slate. And then from a matchup perspective, it's not a great spot for Tom Brady against Chicago. They're not expected to run a ton of plays at this moment. So I think that Edelman is interesting. But over Thielen's, they're obviously different target price points. Like Thielen has seen 9 and 7 targets since he came back, but I think he's one of those guys that really needs a touchdown to pay off that price tag. Definitely think he's in play. Like he's still in my pool. Like I said, a pretty small pool by this point of the week, but definitely prefer getting to Thielen. This is so good. Thanks, Pete. Appreciate it, man. Yeah, if you guys haven't already, be sure and check out Fantasy Labs, the Action Network, our props tool, something that I'm paying attention to. If you guys didn't see my video on YouTube this week, how I'm using the props tool isn't necessarily for projections. Like I have Sean Corner for that. I'm more or less using the props tool to find outliers. So a way you can do that. So last week, Ezekiel Elliott, for example, in the receiving game, you look at his props for the entire year, most of his receiving yards props have been around 20 yards, 23 yards, 23 yards, 22 yards. Last week jumped all the way up to 32 yards. So one of my biggest concerns with Zeke last week is his involvement in the passing game. There's always kind of that chance that Dallas is just going to lay an egg. But if I see a prop like that, to me, it tells me that there's some sharp money coming in on Zeke's prop. So Vegas just has so much more information than we do as far as where the money's coming in. So anytime I see an outlier prop, that's something that I'm paying attention to on Sunday mornings. So I'll always have our props tool open as I'm building teams to kind of and keep an eye on how some of that movement is going. So definitely would recommend you check out our props tool. It's definitely something I'm leveraging on Sundays. Any thoughts on Robbie Anderson today? Tough matchup, potential shootout if the game shoots out. 2 receivers to throw to, maybe Powell. Thanks. Nizzle, thanks for the question, man. Let me see what I had written down about Robbie. Yeah, Robbie's not on my main core right now, but so Anunwa's out. Terrell Pryor obviously is not there. I do really prefer Curse. I'm not really trying to attack Xavier Rhodes. But Robbie Anderson, pretty talented guy. I'm just not sure I really want to pay that on this slate. So let me put him back in my pool and see what his actual price was, because I honestly haven't really considered him most of the week. But let's take a look. 4,500. He's cheaper than I thought. I still don't think I'm going there. I prefer Curse. I think it's the higher floor play, even at 4,100. It could be a week where we need floor, guys, in some ways. I could see it being kind of a lower scoring morning. The good news is for pivots, a lot of the equity is in the afternoon games. So if you're rolling out a lot of teams, if you're rolling out a few amount of teams, still one thing that I think is extremely underrated is late swap. I'm pretty aggressive with late swap. So these slates where we have some of the games in the afternoon that are really appealing, like we have the Saints game in Baltimore against Baltimore that I said I really like for pace and game environment. We also have the Rams in the later game. We have Zeke. I wouldn't get too excited if you're leading some GPPs after the morning games, because there's some people coming, basically. So another thing, I mentioned leverage score before. When I'm trying to leverage off of certain plays, that's also something I'm doing in late swap. So when I'm looking at my teams before the afternoon games start, the first thing I'm doing is I'm going to flex or going to wide receiver in my model, and I'm sorting by leverage score. And if I'm behind, I'm trying to figure out which of these plays make sense. The best thing you can do at that point is just give yourself a chance. Like, I'm never going to be a player that's just trying to cash some of these tournaments. I think over the long term, making some of these lower owned pivots before the afternoon game is something that will put you ahead. I'm trying to get first, guys. Like, I'm not really in this to cash GPPs. If I was in this to cash GPPs, I'd just be playing 50-50s or double ups. But I only play tournaments. So, so I guess that kind of explains that. Leverage score is what I'm using. If you kind of just came into the stream, it's basically allocating ceiling and ownership. So trying to find some of these wide receivers that most people are kind of off for the week, but still have really high ceilings at low ownership is a great way to go when you're doing your pivots. If not Chubb, do you like Duke Johnson? Seems like you're getting some usage. Yeah, so Duke Johnson, again, it's a guy that probably deserves more touches. I'm concerned that Mayfield hasn't been throwing to his running backs a ton. Again, I don't necessarily like the game environment for either of these guys, really, but I think Chubb's equity as far as his touch count is what really matters. Duke, his touch floor is obviously lower to me. He's a guy that's going to be involved in the passing game a little bit more, hopefully. I just don't think it's really enough to get you there from a ceiling perspective. Which two players are you wanting most for GPPs? You're probably not going to like my answer, but Todd Gurley and Robert Woods. So just because they're good plays and they're going to be highly owned doesn't mean you can't play them in GPPs, guys, especially the Todd Gurley's and Ezekiel Elliott's of the world. I'm not really going to get too cute at running back, which is why I still really want to work through some of these cheaper running back plays. It seems like everyone is on. I'm trying to secure volume. I think you can get your differentiation elsewhere. One of the things that I think makes a ton of sense from a leverage perspective, I mentioned Stephon Diggs. I think that he's super interesting. Trying to get on Diggs after he had Patrick Peterson last week. Definitely think makes a lot of sense. Haven't mentioned Jarvis Landry. It's weird because his price just hasn't moved a ton. So 7,300 for Jarvis Landry, someone that's been super inefficient with Baker Mayfield, is a scary play, but where there's fear, there's opportunity, right? So I'm kind of interested in the leverage that you get from Jarvis Landry because of how popular Chubb's going to be, how popular Njoku's going to be. It makes more sense if you're going to play him with a Baker stack. So the Bucs are dead last in completion percentage allowed. So that sets up pretty well for Jarvis. Yeah, I'm a little bit worried about that in general, but I think that he's somewhat interesting for GPPs. If people aren't going to play Marquise Goodwin on the other side of this Rams game, he's the guy that I'm basically running back my Rams stacks with. As far as some other GPP plays, I have a lot of interest in Golden Tate for some of the similar reasons that I like Landry. I like Golden Tate because if Kerryon Johnson is going to be extremely popular, I think that Tate's extremely interesting in the middle of the field against this offense and with a condensed target share. But thanks for your question, Real Wildcat. Thanks for being here, man. Appreciate it. Do I think Kerryon Johnson is cash viable? Yes. Will rain play a bigger role in that Cleve-Tampa Bay game? Is there rain? Yeah, I don't really pay a whole lot of attention to rain. One of the things I keep up is wind. Anything 15 miles and above is something you can back test in our trends tool. That's what really matters to me is wind. So, yeah, so I guess I'll have to keep an eye on that game. If it's just raining, doesn't really change much for me. Easy to stuff Cohen in, 1 p.m. only, no running back studs. Yeah, I was just talking about kind of the afternoon game, but if you're playing the 1 p.m. slate, I think Cohen's a really solid play. It's obviously thinner at running back. It allows you to kind of get up to some of these other plays. It allows you to get up to Thielen, allows you to get up to Diggs. Mentioned Golden Tate in the mid-range. The 1 p.m. slate is going to be kind of gross, guys, in my opinion. I really like the idea of giving yourself flexibility today in the 4 p.m. games on even more than normal. Any thoughts on DK tiers for today or in general? Yeah, I messed around with tiers a little bit last year. I think it's more valuable in some other sports. Like, I actually really like it for NBA. Really excited once things calm down a little bit, which might be never, but I'm going to start playing some NBA a little bit more. I attacked tiers in that format a decent amount last year. But yeah, I think that tiers showdown, there's always going to be value in some of those niche games. I'll have an announcement in the next week or two about a contest I'm going to run or a challenge I'm going to run for some niche sport things. Definitely in on that. Most week chalks D hasn't worked out this year, just something to consider. Yeah, so defense, there's always going to be a ton of variance with defense. I think the most important thing you can do at defense is focus on pressure, guys. Pressure, pass attempts, pace. Like, it doesn't really matter so much to me what the other team's going to score. Like, I don't really care about score points. More interested in what the game flow is going to be. So that's why spread is so important, because you want those pass attempts. Definitely think it makes a lot of sense to just play these. I mean, we mentioned this sheet before, but this is what I'm looking at. I'm looking at pace, looking at plays, and I'm looking at offensive line versus defensive line against teams that are going to pass a lot. So like that's one of the arguments for playing Buffalo's defense as kind of a punt this week is they pressure a decent amount. They've been better than most people realize, but there's going to be a ton of pass attempts because Indy throws the ball so much, and Luck will take sacks. In season-long DFS league, Eckler or Chubb? Yeah, so if your DFS league has Eckler on the slate, probably prefer Eckler over Chubb. Manny only streaming to talk about what he's going through. Mentioned it won't be NFL related. Oh, okay, interesting. I didn't know that, but in general, checking out Manny and Hodge, something I'd recommend for sure. McCoy thoughts? Yeah, I guess I didn't mention McCoy. There's a chance that this offense is somewhat stabilized. I guess that's crazy to even say about Derek Anderson, but if it is, there's a chance that McCoy ends up being a pretty decent touch per dollar play today. I'm not normally interested in playing guys in this type of environment, but yeah, I think it makes a certain amount of sense. McCoy is one of those guys that if you make a trend in labs for these underdog running backs, it's interesting that they don't normally hit value, but the ones that do, McCoy's done pretty well in some of these games where they're heavy underdogs in Buffalo. So guy that's involved in the passing game where we're considering all these other guys kind of in his range, right? McCoy makes a decent amount of sense from a touch perspective. I don't know if there's a ton of upside there for touchdowns because who knows if they're even going to be in a position to score a lot of touchdowns. Yeah, so looking at DraftKings, and he's priced around the same places like Terry Cohen for a little bit more. I probably prefer Yeldon if you want to get up a little bit as well. Yeldon, there's obviously a chance that Hyde sees a decent amount of work today, but we're still not totally sure what Hyde's role is going to be. Imagine missing Joe's Twitch stream on Donkeys. Yeah, thanks, Pete. Appreciate it, man. Yeah, if you guys aren't ready, shoot me a follow on Twitch. YouTube as well. I'll be having videos throughout the week. But Sunday morning is really going to be focused on Twitch. Just the community aspect of it is just great. My first couple of weeks doing this, I was streaming only on YouTube, and basically anyone that's been doing this, Hodge, Manny, they just thought I was a massive donkey for not being on Twitch. So decided to make the switch. Is there a price range that you go for defense? Yeah, I mean, it's week to week. Depends on where roster construction's leading you, right? So last week, I thought it made a ton of sense to get to Chicago at 3,300 against Brock Osweiler. Didn't really work out so well. My punt defense, I think, was Dallas last week. But more than likely, I'm typically paying down at defense, again, targeting pass attempts on the other side, pace, pressure. You can do that for defenses in 2K to 2,500 range a lot of weeks. But there's obviously an aspect of paying up to be contrarian with Jacksonville at 3,600. Even the Rams, so Bales had the Rams last week in the 3K milli. I thought it was a really sharp play because everyone is just piling on Chicago, at least at the higher stakes, piling on Chicago at a similar price point. But this Rams defense, I think he got him at like 4%. So I definitely think that paying up to be contrarian for Jacksonville, for the Rams this week, you can make an argument for Minnesota, even though they are on the road. Makes a lot of sense from a ceiling perspective. All these teams pressure and pretty good matchups on the other side of things with poor offensive lines. McCoy thoughts? Yeah, I talked about McCoy. Did someone squat the CSU handle on Twitch? Ooh, I don't know. I need to get more involved in the Twitch streets. Yeah, Pete, I'm surprised you're not, to be honest. You'd probably just smash this. Just don't take my 9 a.m. slot, man. You're going to take all my viewers away. Cheap wide receiver, Curse, Smith, or Snead. Yeah, so that's going to be a decision I make. I'm kind of heavy on Flacco right now, so I'm leaning Snead. I think Curse is probably the higher expectation play there, but they're really close. Like these wide receivers, probably within a point or two of each other. I think that Curse is probably going to be higher owned. It's not really a secret that that's how you beat this Minnesota defense. You avoid roads. But yeah, I really like Snead. I like that game environment, guys. Like this Baltimore-New Orleans game, I think is one that if you're overlooking is a huge mistake. It's better than Periscope. Yeah, I haven't done a ton of Periscope stuff, but liking the Twitch stuff so far. There's just a lot of things you can do with different overlays and such. It's kind of cool. I'm on a Mac, so I'm kind of limited to some things I can do. But yeah, it's been pretty good so far. Morning, Joe. Watching you in this UK game. Yeah, thanks for being here. It's fun to do these on Sundays. We'll see when Manny goes on. Normally he goes on around 10:15. So I'll keep answering some questions if you guys keep firing them. Why is Kamara not being mentioned? Yeah, he was actually one of the first guys I talked about today. It's a really tough matchup for running backs in the passing game. But if everyone's just going to pile on Zeke, everyone's just going to pile on Gurley, you're going to get probably the lowest ownership you'll see in quite a while on Kamara. Anytime he's had a couple down games, like I get that Ingram's involved now, like totally understand that. But like this guy has more upside than nearly any running back in the entire league. He's priced all the way at 8,500, makes it extremely tough. I don't think I'll make it there on a main team. And the problem with Kamara is his price. But one thing that's really nice about Kamara is you can say you're locked into Todd Gurley in the afternoon game, afternoon games, but you're behind. Instead of pivoting over to Zeke, maybe you pivot to Kamara and get much lower ownership at a similar price point. That's something that I'm considering. I'm probably going to have Gurley on my main team, just full disclosure. Going to do everything I can to get Gurley and Zeke. So if I do have those guys and I feel like I still am a little bit behind after the morning, as of right now, it's looking like I'll have a lot more exposure to the afternoon. But pivoting off of one of those high-priced running backs over to Kamara, if you feel like you're way behind and you need to leverage the field, that's something I'm interested in. A-Rob or Crabtree in a standard? Yeah, so I'm going to take a look and see what I have for Crabtree on here. More locked into Willie Snead and John Brown at this time. But yeah, I mean, you can make an argument that the way Crabtree is used is similarly to how Willie Snead is used. So he's a pretty decent play. I mean, Crabtree's going to have a role. He probably has a larger role in the red zone. So Crabtree, 6 red zone targets, 3 looks inside the 10. And Snead's only had 2 red zone targets and 0 inside the 10. So definitely think that Crabtree has the better role in the red zone. Yeah, I really like. It scares me how much I like Flacco right now, because it's not really a path that I normally make it to. I guess one thing on the other side of that, yeah, I mean, it is a funnel defense against New Orleans. They're pretty good against the run, not near as good against the pass. This Baltimore offense has been extremely efficient. It's going to be the highest paced game of the entire night or the entire day. Yeah, so I'm in on Crabtree. I think Crabtree over A-Rob for me. Do you think you need a piece of this Rams offense in all of your lineups? I mean, I'm never going to tell you not to play Todd Gurley. But if you watch any of my streams, if you've watched any of my lineups over this year, like trying to secure that volume is something I'm always trying to do. Gurley, Woods, like if you were to have a list of 10 players for this entire slate, both of them will be on it. Get the Breakers on Twitch. Yeah, the Breakers. Shout out Breakers. You guys almost beat my Phoenix Suns. That is absolutely absurd. Yeah, if you guys don't know, Peter and Bales bought a minor league minor league basketball team over in Europe, I believe. I can't remember exactly where they are, but they played a preseason game against the Phoenix Suns and almost beat them, which is insane. Shout out Arizona Sports. You amazing. Thanks, Tyler. Appreciate you being here, man. Any thoughts on DK tiers contest for today or in general? Yeah, let me open up tiers. I don't have any tiers teams right now, but I'll take a look at them for you. 1 second. In general, I mentioned it before, I like playing tiers in NBA quite a bit just because I'm nowhere near as good at NBA as some of the other guys like Pete in this chat. So NBA is a lot more projection heavy than NFL, so I think it makes sense in a format like tiers. Yeah, let me look at the NFL tiers. So one thing that I think is kind of interesting here, I'll just bring this over to this. I'm the worst with Twitch overlays, but here we go. All right, so we got tiers. Let's see what we got here. So the first tier, we got Mahomes, Cousins, Goff, Winston. Probably Goff for me in this tier. Really like him. I think Cousins probably the leverage play that you go after. Interesting that we do have. So I mean, it looks like it's a lot of quarterbacks you're deciding between in the first couple tiers. Outside of that, we have Kamara, Thielen, Ezekiel. So that's the thing with tiers, right? You're trying to make your decision between Zeke and Thielen, kind of a coin flip situation there. I think that anytime you're playing tiers in NFL, you open yourself up to these 1v1s that maybe you're considering on Classic. So if you want to hedge with some tiers lineups, I think that can make some sense. See, if I made a tiers team, I would just have all the running backs. So, I mean, that's probably not what you want to hear. But yeah, I think so. I mean, Robert Woods in tier 5, that's pretty egregious. And then you have these tiers where there's just like a ton of injury concerns. Yeah, and I don't know how good these tiers games are, to be honest. There might be an edge because anytime you're playing these niche games, there's a chance that people are just going to make crazy mistakes. But yeah, I haven't been totally in on tiers to start the year. Maybe I'll take a closer look at it since we've had a couple questions about it in the chat this morning. I'm just using the labs projections for tiers. It's been pretty good so far. Yeah, I mean, not surprised. Sean Corner, he's won the projection contest over at Fantasy Pros 3 years in a row. So anytime, it's the same reason that I think there's so much value in using the models and projected plus minus, because it's all based on our projections and the props tool, like all that stuff. Like our projections are really strong. So if you're using that for tiers, that's probably a great way to go about it. How much does win factor into projections? That'd be a question for Corner. I would imagine that anything over 15 mile per hour wins. He's probably adjusting his projections accordingly. Peter Jennings 88, please do get more involved with Twitch. Really enjoy your content. Yeah, if Peter had a Twitch channel, I'd definitely watch. That's for sure. Vikings Jets supposed to be windy. Oh, interesting. So yeah, I think that still sets up fine for Curse, the way he's being used in kind of his short to intermediate role. Interesting. That might downgrade Diggs a little bit for me in tournaments. But yeah, keep an eye on the wind in that Vikings game. Hey Joe, do you have an opinion on everyone using Chubb in a cash game where the team is a road underdog? The total is rising, but the line hasn't budged. Yeah. So as far as running back, team total does matter for sure. You're trying to target game flow, so I'm looking at spread a decent amount. So yeah, as you mentioned, they are a lower total, but they're not at the bottom. Like it's still like a healthy total relative to the slate as a whole, which is why Njoku is still very much in play. Chubb is more of a roster construction play, in my opinion. I think that that's the main argument. Even like Coleman last week, like Tevin Coleman not used in the passing game a ton. That's always a concern. But what rostering Coleman last week did for you was it allowed you to get to some of these other plays. So I think that's what you have to consider. Like, yeah, Chubb. So if he gets you, if he's going to get you 15 to 20 touches at 3,800, even if he gets you 15, like that's a fantastic play for cash games, even before you look at any of these outside Vegas type perspective things. So, I mean, at 3,600, like there's no one really in his price range that is going to give you that many touches. So that's my take on it. Cheap defense. I mentioned Buffalo and Indy. Indy is the kind of more expensive one. But yeah, Baltimore in that same game, I think makes sense that we like for pace. As far as really cheap, it's a weird week for defense, to be completely honest with you. Like I normally have a smaller pool at defense. Like I still want to look a little bit more at this, definitely. But so Philly at 2,600, I could see myself going there, but don't love the pace in that game. Baltimore at 2,400. If everyone wants to just jump off of them against New Orleans, at least we know there's going to be pass attempts there. So kind of interested in that. Yeah, it's really thin at defense this week, guys. It's not even if salary allows it. I don't think it's a bad slate to get up to Jacksonville, to get up to the Rams at the higher ends in tournaments. I think it makes a lot of sense since a lot of these look pretty thin to me, at least. Week 7 bad chalk. Let's take a look at ownership in general. So I mentioned kind of some of the guys that I like. Yeah, so as far as bad chalk, I think that I'm not really interested in Duke Johnson. I don't know if he's going to be extremely high owned, but if he's anywhere near the 15% range, not really on him, to be honest. I prefer Njoku kind of attacking that side of the game just because Mayfield hasn't shown the ability or at least the willingness to throw to his running backs a ton. That's something that I think matters. Yeah, it's a condensed week, right? So it's hard to look at this and think that there's just a glaring weakness in where the volume is. Yeah, so I mean, the highest owned guys, Gurley, Zeke, Thielen, like all of them are really strong prep plays. I don't know if you can play all three of them. So the slate could easily be broken by which of these three guys you decide to fade. Probably going to be Gurley and Zeke for me. Fading Thielen in this nut spot against the Jets is scary, but tiebreaker is always going to be running back as far as volume for me. Does Gronk being out do anything for you? Yeah, I mean, I like Edelman quite a bit. I talked about it before. Anytime we can get a condensed target share for New England, I'm interested in. I'm just not interested in the game environment a ton right now. Slowest game for pace on the slate. The offensive line matchup, defensive line is kind of middling. Obviously, Chicago's defense is pressured pretty well. But yeah, so that's kind of what I'm looking at. Where is he getting these numbers from? I'm not seeing in the chat. I do have my models up behind us. I obviously can't show you guys anything behind the paywall at Labs, so that's kind of where I'm looking at some of this stuff outside of my overlays. I want to do more of this kind of stuff for you guys going forward. Maybe I'll make one for each position with some of the free stuff that's out there. Football Outsiders has some really good metrics that are free. Airyards.com has some great stuff that's free. But yeah, more or less focused on the tools at Labs, pretty much. I mean, that's what I use on Sunday mornings. How do you go about single entry GPPs? Okay, so here's my single entry rant. I don't think it so much matters with tournaments, single entry versus mass multi-entry versus 3-max. Like, I'm more focused on field size. So I think playing the smaller field size tournaments is the way to go for me personally. So that lends itself to more single entry GPPs. So this week, there's a $1,500 that's on DraftKings. It's only 60 people, 20K up top. I like my odds of beating 60 people a lot more than beating even 1,000 people in something like the SPY. So I'm not saying you have to go up in stakes to attack these smaller fields. One of the things you can do on DraftKings is sort by field size. And yeah, you might not have the massive prize pool, but you also have a lot better chance to get up top. And up top is where all the money is anyway. So as far as single entry GPPs, I would just focus on smaller field size GPPs. That would be my recommendation. Joe is streaming to Twitch and YouTube. Oh, so is there more YouTube questions coming in that I'm missing? I have this restream thing open that's supposed to be getting all the... Looks like I'm getting both of them. But yeah, Twitch is always going to be where I see the majority of the chat. So if you're over on YouTube, check out Twitch as well. Give me a follow on Twitch. Twitch is going to be where the majority of the interaction is on Sunday mornings. Joe, when you review your lineups, where do most mistakes in lineup construction come from? So taking a look at some of the smaller GPPs that I was just mentioning, I think that there's an argument for game stacking for sure. But at the same time, I think that in anything under 100 people, you can build pretty much what you think is optimal and maybe make one slight correlation tweak. So what I most of the time do is I make what I think is the optimal team or a cash team if I did play cash. And then I'm trying to figure out what the best way to increase my correlation very slightly is. Last week for me, that was getting moving off of one of the mid-range wide receivers to Godwin with Winston. Had a decent amount of Atlanta exposure. as well. So it was kind of a different week from that perspective. But when I'm reviewing lineups, a lot of the tournaments in the smaller field are massive game stacks. I definitely think that maybe I'm not doing that enough, but at the same time, I do think that you can make what's closer to optimal in a smaller field tournament. Another mistake I've seen is people in GPPs trying to get way too cute with their running backs than they really need to. I'm more or less concerned about volume, and if I have to eat some chalk with running backs, it's one of the easiest positions to project. So not really worried about that a ton. I'm not getting cute with running back more often than not. I'm more likely to take a shot on a cheaper tight end that I think's in a good spot that might be lower owned, or take a shot on a different wide receiver that I mentioned the airyards.com. So one of the stats I really like there is called Whopper, a Josh Hermsmeyer stat. Shout out, defenses don't matter. But one of the things that's really nice at wide receiver is looking at these guys that are seeing massive air yard target shares that haven't necessarily translated into fantasy points yet. So I think that that's one thing you can do to kind of gain differentiation. It's something that I definitely do if I'm more or less trying to leverage the field, trying to attack some of these wide receivers that have really strong air yards profiles but haven't necessarily panned out yet. Might be due for some progression. So some guys that I'm looking at from that perspective this week, I do think that Jarvis Landry is interesting for a guy that's seeing massive target share, but it hasn't really translated into fantasy points yet. And then honestly, like Alvin Kamara, I mentioned not getting cute at running back, but a guy that's still massively talented. He's used in the passing game. Yes, it's a terrible matchup for running backs in the passing game, but do we really care about that with Kamara? So if we're looking at a ways to be contrarian and not be dumb, I think that attacking a high volume spot makes some sense. Kamara, Landry, those are the guys kind of on, and from that perspective. Jets viable. Let's see. Jets weren't really on my radar, but 2,100 against Minnesota. Yeah, I mean, there was an argument for playing the Arizona defense, and that really worked out last week. Pass attempts for the Vikings, bad offensive line. The Jets don't pressure a ton, but they have a pretty decent secondary. They're not massive underdogs. Yeah, I don't mind the Jets. It might be one that I take a little bit closer look at if I need salary. 2,100 definitely opens up a lot, so good call there. Real Wildcat. Or Unk4423. Congrats on the win last week. Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate it. Just pretty fortunate, honestly, to be making a pivot on my phone at the Vikings game and then have it actually work out. Probably should have gone the other way. Not sure I truly deserved it, but yeah, I'll take it. Thanks, man. How wind gust going to affect that Minnesota-New York Jets game, throwing and kicking? Yeah, so maybe that's an argument for playing the Jets too. But, I mean, if it's going to be windy, maybe they skew to the run a little bit more. You do really want those pass attempts. Throwing and kicking, anything over 15 miles per hour wins is something that I'm going to be watching. If anyone sees Manny go live, let me know in the chat so I can be sure and jump off. Not sure what time he goes on. Normally it's around 10:15. What do you think about this for cash on FanDuel? Flacco, Gurley, Cohen, Crabtree, Godwin. Yeah, I mean, those are a lot of the plays I'm on. Not necessarily going to really talk about specific lineups on here, but I mean, I did mention how much I like Flacco. Flacco to Crabtree makes a ton of sense, and then mixing in some Gurley and Woods, something I'll be on. Pete stream, please God. Yeah, check out Pete's Periscope. I'm sure Pete's going to be in the Twitch streets before long, but his Periscope is very good. Definitely don't miss that on Saturday nights. Please tell me how bad playing Peyton Barber is, so I stopped thinking about it. Yeah, I'm not playing Peyton Barber. I was talking about kind of being cute at running back. I think that's a good example of getting a little bit too cute. I think there's guys that have a higher touch expectation than Barber that I'm a little bit more comfortable with. Thomas or Thielen for DK GPP? Thielen for me. In higher stakes, smaller field GPPs, how often do you see naked quarterbacks? Yeah, Smiz ran naked Winston last week. I think it's a case-by-case basis. If you like the game and you're trying to capture a lot of the upside of the game, basically what Smiz did last week is he played Winston and then played a bunch of the Atlanta guys, which I think was pretty viable last week. So there was an argument for playing Winston naked and running it back with Coleman and Julio, which is something we saw at the high stakes a decent amount. I do think that in general, I prefer to have correlation with quarterbacks. I think that if I was playing cash games, maybe naked would make a little bit more sense, but I'm still trying to get to the top. I think naked quarterback in certain situations it makes sense. I'm probably more aggressive than most at targeting or quarterback to running back stacks. So like Goff to Gurley, Cam to McCaffrey, especially these guys that have upside in the passing game, like earlier in the season playing Breeze and Kamara together. Just trying to soak up a lot of the target share without having to pay up for these elite wide receivers is something that I think is extremely viable if you're trying to capture all the touchdowns. Gazelle with a 75-yard TD bomb. Yeah, I don't have Twitter up right now, but if I did, I would imagine that Smiz has some Gazelle gifts going. So love that. Crabtree or A-Rob. Yeah, I mentioned probably Crabtree for me there. Thoughts on OJ Howard? Do you at least need to find a way to get to Njoku? Yeah, Njoku I think is the clear top play at tight end. See OJ Howard, Brait, like these guys are in, like when we're looking at team totals, that's something that I do weigh pretty heavily at the tight end position. So Tampa Bay at home actually matters quite a bit for tight end as well. It could easily be Howard, it could easily be Brait. I just am not quite sure exactly who it's going to be, and that's the problem. Njoku is just seeing massive volume. But yeah, if you play down for Brait at 3,100, if you pay down for OJ Howard at 3,600, it could certainly work out for you. You just have to make sure you pick the right one, and I'm not sure I have the ability to feel pretty confident either way. New Zealand national champs. Yeah, I didn't realize it was in New Zealand. We got to do a Labs company trip to see the Breakers, just not against my Suns again. John Brown today seems great after last week's 5 points. Yeah, trying to jump on a guy that just underperformed last week. It is a really good spot. So John Brown against the Saints defense that's been getting beat deep. Super interested in that. What do you think of Mac today? Not really on Mac. I mentioned how much that team's passing. Let's see. What is even his price? Not a guy that's really on my board right now. So 4,400. I think I still prefer some of the other guys we've been talking about. Chubb, Kerryon Johnson. If you get up a little, like I'm not paying 4,400 for Marlon Mack when I can get Tariq Cohen for 5,100 if that helps. Game stack with Cincy as well. Does the win put you off Thielen's? Not really. I think that Thielen's value has been kind of coming from when Cousins sees pressure. He's just looking to Thielen's right away. Diggs has a lower ADOT than Thielen's. That's interesting. I did mention I do really like Diggs quite a bit, but I'm not sure. I'm going to have to check and see what that wind was like after we get off stream, but anything over 15 miles per hour is what I'm focused on. Next switch, Holker reviewing CSU lineup in the 1060, #friends. Yeah, I always got to review Pete's lineup. Pete's pretty aggressive with game stacks, and it usually works out for him more often than not. So he's one of the first teams I look at in our contest dashboard over at Labs. We'll talk a little bit more about that on Tuesday when I do my review, but yeah. Do you agree with the Mitch ownership of 2%? Does that seem right to you? Seems low to me. Yeah, I think there's an argument for playing Trubisky with Gabriel, with Tariq Cohen. So Mitch, let's go back over to the quarterback page. So again, not a great game for pace. Second worst, the worst on the slate. It's only 10 games, obviously. It's always a pretty decent matchup because this offensive line has played really well. New England doesn't pressure very well, so it is a really good matchup from that perspective. He is home. He's a slate dog. Targeting home dogs is something that's been profitable in GPPs from a macro perspective. Tight spread. Yeah, I mean, I get it. I think that you have to pair him with these really fast guys because those are the guys that have the best matchup against New England. So looking at Gabriel, looking at Tariq Cohen. Your lineup review of high stakes is extremely helpful. Thanks for all the good insight, Joe. Yeah, Real Wildcat. Thanks, man. Thanks for checking out the Tuesday show. It's been really fun doing those. Playing in that tournament this year, I think has made me a better player in some ways because on Tuesdays I know I'm going to have to justify the decisions that I'm making. So just kind of makes me dial things in a little bit more. So I'm glad you're enjoying the reviews. Guys, if you haven't already, If you're watching on YouTube, give me a follow or give me a sub over there. But I would recommend you check out Twitch and give me a follow on Twitch. The majority of the interaction on Sunday mornings, these live streams, is going to be over on Twitch. The platform just works out a lot easier for that kind of thing. So I'm going to start to transition away from YouTube a little bit. I know there's some people that'll never click a Twitch link, but YouTube is something that eventually I'm going to kind of transition away to from live. Do I have a conviction play? Robert Woods, probably. I really like the spot for him. He's my favorite part of that entire game. Really like Todd Gurley. That goes without saying. I would be shocked if Gurley's not on my main team, but playing Gurley and Woods, I don't even know if you necessarily have to bring it back with Goff. Those are the guys that I probably have the most conviction about. You're probably not going to get a ton of super contrarian takes from me. Like I said, I play a really small amount of lineups every week. So I'm really dialed into a pretty small core at this point. Do you have Taylor Gabriel in the same group as Curse and Snead? Yeah, price is a little different, but yeah, I think that those are the guys that we're deciding between. McCoy or Barber? McCoy for me. Don't think he's streaming today. Is he not answering questions from the Twitch chat? Yeah, I'm on the Twitch chat. Yeah, just a little bit behind. Yeah, sorry guys, I'll try and catch up the chat. Thanks Nizzles for filling him in here. Good deal, soon enough. John Brown or Josh Gordon? Yeah, Josh Gordon's a super interesting one. So his target share has been strong. So yeah, I think I'm a little bit more interested in the upside from Gordon than Edelman, because if you take into account the price involved, I think you're getting a little bit of a discount with Gordon, how he's been being used. Talented guy, 5,600. Yeah, I think his ceiling is very comparable to Edelman. Definitely a lower floor, but you're going to probably eat a little bit more ownership with Gordon. So if you get up to Edelman at 6,600, definitely some leverage to be had there. There's a... Yeah, I'm going to have to look a little bit closer at New England, just because I don't like the game environment, like I said, but Edelman at 6,600 might end up being a really strong play, especially with Gronk out. Yeah, exactly. So much better than YouTube. I agree. I'm like slowly but surely getting used to the Twitch side of things. Definitely like the platform as a whole. Think that anytime you get Amazon involved in something, you're doing something right. So Amazon, I don't have the sub ability yet, but eventually you'll be able to attach your Amazon Prime account to this. So Twitch is the future. Yeah, I think streaming is going to be really big. It kind of gives me a unique platform, right? Like, so being able to market kind of the Fantasy Labs Action Network tools in kind of a unique way was like the kind of impetus behind doing all this, getting a little bit more interaction with you guys. Yeah, like anyone can kind of write articles, do podcasts, but like Sunday morning, I think there's like a lot of value in actually like talking to smart people, right? And I sometimes forget, like a lot of us have like our core group of people that we talk to on Sunday mornings. But yeah, a lot of you guys maybe don't have that. Like maybe you're just one of those people that takes fantasy a little bit more serious than your friends, and your friends aren't as involved as you. So you need a place to go to kind of work through these decisions. And I think Twitch is a really great place to do that. And starting early enough, jumping on this Twitch stream with me, but then following up with Hodge and Manny as well, and then Smith. So and hopefully Peter eventually. Would love to see him on Twitch. Always trying to pick his brain on stuff as well. But yeah, I just want to kind of do my best to show you guys some of the things that I'm doing. Like I said, like maybe I'll start doing a few more of these spreadsheet things. I didn't really have a ton of time this week to iron it completely out. Maybe kind of take some of this noise away. It's kind of an aggressive spreadsheet. But yeah, I would like to do that for some other positions as well, to really focus on stuff. So any other questions, guys? I'm going to jump off here pretty soon. I got some lineups to build. I'll let you guys get back to your morning. If you need any help with mods or anything, just holler. Help out with mains. And yeah, I might take you up on that. I have literally no idea what I'm doing. I know it's a little bit more difficult for someone with a Mac. So yeah, I'm just kind of working through it. Does great work over at the Smith channel. Yeah, sweet. I could definitely use some help on that. Robbie A, quick thoughts. Yeah, I mentioned him. It's really tough against Rhodes. Prefer Curse in that game for sure, but Robbie's price at 4,500 if you're just betting on talent makes some sense, especially if the wind, though, in that game is picking up. Not as interested in Robbie A. All right, guys, just final thoughts here. If you haven't already, be sure and sub to the YouTube and follow me over on Twitch. Check out Fantasy Lab, check out the Action Network. Our props tool is probably the next thing I'm going to pivot over to, see what kind of things are looking like in the betting market. Follow me on Twitter if you're not already, at Joe Holka. Check out Manny's stream, Hodges' stream. I think that's pretty much it, guys. Let's get it in week 7. Thanks for being here, everyone. And all right, good talk. See you guys out there.